in Paris. What's the thinking behind the president's proposal?
Well, I mean, it's a very Macronian gesture to take everyone by surprise, and I think he feels that possibly by conquering the Swift with the national rally on the back foot and pulling off the sort of stunt. I guess he's thinking that the Europeans are one thing, national elections are another thing. European elections often, sum up a kind of big protest vote. And that in national elections, there's a two-round system which will work against the national rally because the kind of mainstream parties can come together against it, if you like. And you can have one party will say, "I won't stand here," so that a champion can emerge against the national rally. That's his calculation, but I think it's flawed in the sense that even if he does manage to ward off a national rally victory at the election, what is there going to be in place? It's impossible. It's impossible that he will win them in any way. So we even in the best of scenarios for him, I think we're confronted with the likelihood of paralysis on part.
Okay, but we could end up in a situation where he's president, but the prime minister is this young national rally Jordan Bardella.
Yeah. Indeed, I mean that's the scenario where we have a national rally victory and produces enough MPs to form a government and can form an alliance with maybe some on the Conservative Party to form a government. And then you have what we call a cohabitation, where you have this odd scenario where there's a president of one party and a prime minister and a government of the other party, and the president has to take a step back from policy, and that's the way the kind of things happened before, and it's happened before twice, and it's kind of worked, but it hasn't been what the prime minister would want, right? And that's what would be completely and utterly unthinkable just a few years ago.
Thanks very much. What's going on at Monsieur? Who is voting for the right and why? Sarah Hobolt is a professor in European politics at the London School of Economics. And I asked her first if we could say that there was a clear picture of voters moving to the right.
Overall, we are seeing a sort of shift to the right if we look at the European Parliament as a whole. It's not a shift, of course, to the right everywhere in Europe. In Scandinavia, for example, we're seeing sort of opposite trends. But in France, Germany, the Netherlands, and a number of big countries, we are seeing that voters are moving more to the right.
Who is voting? Is it young people? Has been suggested quite a bit lately.
Well, I mean, the story about young people is interesting, of course, coming from Britain, where we have a very clear age divide, but the other way around, where young people are much more likely to say they're going to vote Labour in the upcoming general election. What we're seeing in some countries like France and Germany is that younger voters are backing the radical right in the same number or perhaps even larger numbers than older voters. For example, in France, where the National Rally topped the poll, they had a lead candidate, a very young, charismatic Bardella, who's very popular with young voters. And in Germany, we also see that the AfD, the radical right wing, that had their best electoral results in their history, coming in second, are popular amongst young voters, especially young men in Eastern Germany. So it's not just young voters who vote for these parties, but in some countries they are a significant portion of the electorate. But it's not everywhere. For example, the young voters in Italy are more likely to vote for the left.
The drive, wherever it is and whatever age group it is, voting right. What is driving that? Is it immigration? Is it climate? Is it cultural identity politics?
I mean, one of the key drivers is, of course, a desire for change in terms of sort of grievances about what people are facing in their everyday lives. This desire for change is something we often see amongst young voters, and the radical right is very successful in using populist rhetoric to address these grievances about concerns they may have about cost of living, lack of affordable housing, or higher unemployment, and also linking that with the sort of cultural concerns you mentioned about immigration and how society is changing, and promising them that they will have a better future with the radical right who are in charge of pushing policies.
Right, so the desire for change is not. It's not a reactionary vote.
Well, it's not reactionary in the sense that they want everything to remain the same. But of course, on the cultural issue, often there might be a nostalgia for a country that is more powerful in the world, that's not changing in terms of its ethnic makeup. Because one thing the radical right does have in common across Europe is very nativist rhetoric, often wanting to reduce immigration, and even in some cases, like the German radical right, the AfD, even wanting to deport immigrants.
Is there a difference between the north and the south of Europe, with the north more likely to go left, and here we are in the UK, of course, expected to vote in a centre-left government. Poland just recently moved back centre-left, and you mentioned Scandinavia.
I think more what we're seeing is that the radical right really used to be concentrated in a few countries, and what we're seeing now, there's almost no country in Europe that doesn't have, Britain being of course an exception, but also not voting in these elections, but not having a radical right wing party. So it's more kind of a uniform trend that we see these kind of populist radical right parties also now in Southern Europe, where they used to be not as powerful. So in that sense, we can't sort of see there's a north-south divide. However, there's a kind of clear geographical divide within countries. People in cities, large cities, tend to be less likely to vote for the radical right. They gain more of their votes in towns and rural areas. Another factor is education. We see that people who are higher educated, university educated, are much less likely to vote for the radical right.
Professor Sarah Hobart. Jose Manuel Barroso is the former president of the European Commission and the former Prime Minister of Portugal. I asked for his reaction to the EU election results.
The centre as holds, but with a very worrying, let's say, rise of those parties more to the right, namely some radical parties. But on average, I think we can say that there is a clear majority in the European Parliament of the traditional mainstream pro-European party.
Okay, so you're not too worried though from what you're saying.
I'm very worried with the situation in France, because France is such a central country. I usually say that France is the only country in Europe that is north and south. France is an English channel, but it's also a Mediterranean country. It's the only country in Europe, if you think about it, that you can say it's north and south. And so everything that happens in France is very important for the overall balance. And so, yes, we may have a government of the far right in France, or at least politics that are going to destabilize that country, and that country has a huge impact in the overall European system.
Do you think President Macron was right to call a parliamentary election?
I think from his point of view, he may be right. It may happen that he thinks that if the French electorate is put with the sharp choice between, let's call them moderate parties and far right, they will still be in the more moderate camp. Or he may think that it's not after all a bad idea if the far right may have an experience in the government, knowing how the difficulties of the government, because he will remain the presence of France. So it's what in France they call a cohabitation, and he may think that he can control the situation. Anyhow, you will have to do it probably later. So I think from his point of view, from a political strategic point of view, it has some rationality, because it takes initiative and takes a look that can be understood by France.
Okay, so whether it's in France or any other country in Europe, why do you think people are turning to the far right? Is it because of a pushback against a culture that they see as increasingly left liberal? What is it?
For many reasons. One also goes on first. The first one Brexit was against some of the consensus, the votes not again, because was against so-called establishment. So it's a general movement that you find in many European democracies, center left and center right, to some extent are a victim of their success. They are successful in social market economy, open society, public economy. But now, some people say we went too far. Too much migration, too much internationalism, too much globalization, and we need some protection. I think there are new problems which mainstream parties have not been able to respond adequately, even if DPP is trying to do it by very balanced say. I believe part of the left is very much now in the so-called identity culture, gender issues that are very attractive to some urban elected, but they are forgetting one thing, that is essential. The left in Europe historically was created to defend the workers, the working class, and not just some issues that are very appealing for urban educated elites. And so there is a disconnect there, I think, and that explains why there is a decline in for instance, the Social Democrats in general, it's huge loss they have, but there are other countries also in Europe. So that's the middle concern for them.
Does the new makeup of the European Parliament change how the EU treats Ukraine, how it treats immigration, how it treats climate?
I think I can know. Yes, there are some challenges, but for instance, there is a strong majority for Ukraine. And I believe climate, already before the election, there were many members that thought that it was going too far. There was some backlash against some more, let's say, extreme positions on climate. I'm in favor of action against climate. I personally believe that some of these apocalyptic discourses that the world is going to end tomorrow, I mean, it's not helping the cause of the climate protection. On the contrary, it's making people more disadvantaged, feeling that they are not understood by the system. And so I think that will be some rebalancing, yes, but I don't expect any fundamental change in the overall political European outcome.
Just one final thought. Do you think Olaf Scholz should follow Emmanuel Macron's lead and call a snap election?
In Germany, I'm much more worried about France, because Germany, in fact, was that AfD, the far right, and that's a real far right party, came second, but almost all the others are very strong. So there is a huge majority in Germany, in parliament. That's not what's going to happen in the next parliament in France. We are not sure if there will be a Bundeswehr majority.
Coming up on the programme, we'll have the latest dispatch from Jim Rutherford on his election road trip.
Parties are effortlessly patronising when they try to categorise their target voters, but none has had the staying power of Essex Man and his lusty offspring, Basildon Man.
Once again, in touch on social media, #BBC. Our email address, It is Manifesto Week, when we hear the detailed plans and promises of all the main parties, starting today with the Liberal Democrats. Now, obviously they're not going to be implementing a whole programme of government, but if they hold the balance of power, then, just as in 2010, they can insist on certain policies, and even if they just get near government, they can influence what other parties do, and of course they can claim credit for it. In the campaign so far, the party leader Ed Davey has made some very moving social media films about his role caring for his disabled son. And at their manifesto launch today, he made it clear the party's priority would be the NHS and care. And he recalled caring for his ill mum as a teenager.
The last 18 months or so, her pain was excruciating. She was confined to her bed, and caring for her became my life. Before school and after school. Giving her morphine for the pain, helping her on and off the toilet. Sitting on her bed for hours, just talking to her, and trying to make the most of every moment. I was 15 when it finally took her, visiting her on a totally unsuitable dementia ward, my school uniform, when she died. I never called myself a young carer, I never thought of myself that way. I was just looking after my mum. She needed it because I loved her. And in these last few years, I've been privileged to meet many young carers from all over the country, and I hear the same thing from them. All of their stories are very different, yet, in so many ways, they are also the same.
Well, Ben Chu is BBC Verity's policy and analysis correspondent, and he's here in the studio. And Ben, we focus there, that clip, because care is very much sort of centre of the Lib Dems offering. What caught your eye when you were watching the launch?
Well, big picture, Sarah, is that the Liberal Democrats propose to raise around £27 billion in new taxes. That's about 1% of national income, and spend the same amount. That's It's not a hugely radical shift, to be honest, but there are questions about both sides of that ledger. For instance, on the spending side, the pledge from Liberal Democrats of free personal care for the frail elderly in England, it's not clear that they could deliver that for the £4 billion a year they claim. On education, they've got a long list of promises, extension of free school meals, mental health professionals in every school. Again, it's not quite clear that they could do that for the £2 billion a year they've earmarked. And on the taxes side, they want to raise about £9 billion a year from capital gains tax and bringing back some taxes on banks. Those aren't unreasonable totals, speaking to tax experts, but they shouldn't present them as costless, as only falling on billionaires and on bankers, because the bank levy, for instance, analysts say that could well be passed on ultimately to customers. Not saying you shouldn't do it, but it's not costless. And finally, they've got 1.4 billion which they propose to raise by taxing share buybacks. That's been described to me by tax experts as a nonsense figure. So questions on both sides of the ledger, the tax side and the spending side for the Democrats' cost.
And thanks very much. Any Price has been looking at the politics of not winning an election, but influencing policy nonetheless.
It was one of the more obscure stunts of the 2015 election campaign. The then Chief Secretary to the Treasury, the Lib Dem Danny Alexander, posing outside the Treasury with a yellow budget box.
It's a plot. It symbolises an important point, which is that we Liberal Democrats have a very, very different view, both from the Conservatives and the New Labour Party, of what should happen to the nation's finances in the next parliament.
The party had just spent 5 years as coalition partners with the Tories. The idea was to try and draw a distinction with the Conservatives on policy promises and on their record in government.
Nick Clegg, Liberal Democrats, 19,756.
It didn't pay off. The Lib Dems lost 37 seats. Well, we can all remember what happened to Nick Clegg.
In politics, you live by the sword and you die by the sword.
But despite that electoral defeat, supporters insist the party has been able to shift the political dial and influence policy making in and out of government. Peter Carroll was involved in 4 general election campaigns for the Lib Dems.
Politics is not just about who wins the election. It's about what things are we discussing. I can sense already that Ed Davey and his team have put care right at the centre, and I think the fact he's talking about that will influence the other parties too.
Ed Miliband offered the other big top of the 2015 election. Remember the Ed Stone?
These 6 pledges are now carved in stone.
A stone monolith of Labour's priorities. It didn't mention his proposed cap on energy prices that he called for that year.
The next levy document will freeze gas and electricity prices until the start of 2017.
Something which David Cameron described as Marxist. Curious then that Theresa May pledged something similar in the 2017 campaign for the Tories.
You wouldn't use a cap on energy price rises.
Influencing policy when you're not in power is a key part of British elections, not least because of the first-past-the-post electoral system we have here.
We have won a national election in this country. I'm immensely proud of that achievement, I really am.
The success of UKIP in local and European elections by 2014 set in motion the path to Brexit, even though the party never won more than 1 seat at a general election.
We will give the British people a referendum with a very simple in or out choice.
Rob Ford is a political scientist at Manchester University.
The trick Farage has pulled for much of the past 20 years is to apply pressure to the right wing of the Conservative Party by winning over votes on that flag, which then potentially costs them seats to other parties.
Reform UK is of course the new kid on the right side of the block, but it's run by a familiar face who's causing problems for the Conservatives. Proof, says Rob Ford, that absorbing the policies of others can be dangerous.
If you try and pay off somebody, all you do is incentivise them to come back and ask for more. The EU referendum was offered in part to, as David Cameron put it at the time, shoot the UKIP box. That didn't work. We ended up having Brexit. Theresa May and Boris Johnson were then able to squeeze out that UKIP unit. But now many of those voters have decided that the Conservative government is not delivering for them.
The one thing on which the Lib Dems and Reform UK can agree is the need for proportional representation, so the smaller parties Parliament, even if the bigger parties are already listening.
Ellie Price reporting now. Well, joining us now is Christine Jardy, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for the Cabinet Office, Women and Equality and Scotland. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We saw a very personal and moving news when we heard from Ed Davey this morning. Realistically, of course, Liberal Democrats are not going to form the next government. So is the aim really to get this personal campaign and use it to influence whoever is in power?
Well, we are hoping to win more seats, obviously, at the general election, and that will be up to the British public, and we hope to fill place. But I think what was set out today in its presentation, and yes, it was very moving, and there were parts of it which spoke to my experience of in a family where we lost a parent. But it set out who we are. It set out the fact that we're a party who listens to what people tell us and understand the experience of the British public over the past 5 years since the last election, when we've been through the pandemic, Brexit, Ukraine, energy crisis, cost of living crisis. Our NHS is struggling, it's under immense pressure. We need better social care, we need free personal care, like we have in Scotland. And what Ed was setting out is what we want to do to fix the NHS and social care in this country, because that's what people are telling us they need.
Okay, but just, and I appreciate, you're hoping to, you're setting out who you are, and that's how people will hope to think and vote. But also you're setting out presumably the policies that the people come to put in. So when it comes down to it, is the most critical thing that any government can do, they would take from the Democrats, any sort of negotiation with the Democrats, it would be over social care.
The most critical thing that anybody can do is vote on the 4th of July.
No, but I mean from the party's point of view. I mean from, if you're just not in a discussion with Labour who need to rely on more votes, are you going to say only if, and is at the end of that sentence, the critical thing social care?
The critical thing is social care, but to get the changes that we need, people need to vote Liberal Democrat. It's not to do with the Labour Party, or for that matter the Conservative Party. It's to do with voting Liberal Democrat and getting someone who is a strong local champion and who will work for your community and your constituency, and then influence in Parliament what happens. And the only people that we are focusing on speaking to at the moment are the British public.
Indeed, and you're making the point that actually, critical to people voting is trust. And which is why the Liberal Democrats have said that really you can, that you've got the best costed manifesto. But we know, and we heard actually from Ben Shew already, that your figures are unbelievably optimistic. The Nuffield Trust has this morning, on the social care thing, said that their sums on how much this will cost look to be inadequate.
No, we have taken a very cautious view with our figures. We've built in things like behavioural changes, and we are determined that we don't overestimate this. If you look at we have experience of introducing free personal care. We did this in Scotland when we were part of the administration of the Labour Party. So this is something that we know about, that we have costed very carefully, and we have been cautious in our approach to where we find the funding, which we will, as Ed laid out, take from reversing the tax cuts for the banks, and by reforming capital gains tax, so that only the super wealthy in this country, the billionaires and the multi-millionaires, will actually pay more. Other people who pay capital gains tax should pay less.
And where are these staff coming from? The new carers that are
Well, that is critical. We're also looking to employ 8,000 more GPs. And what we would do is we would encourage people into the social care sector by increasing the minimum wage by £2 an hour. And we want to do that because we know that we need more staff across the NHS and the primary care specifically. What we would do with GPs is at the moment, GPs are disincentivised for continuing after certain age because of the pension contract. It actually costs them more. So what we want to do is reform that so that it's free to stay in corporate, and also that the wage is more care.
Yeah, they're showing the pounds per care. The minimum wage will go up when? And the with then
in the
government.
next financial year. Because
And that would attract all the carers you would need. You wouldn't need to rely on immigration.
well, currently not just that we have a visa system which is working to help bring people into this country that we need, and just causing backlogs. And we have people in this country who work in that system. If we could clear the genuine refugees and asylum seekers, if we could clear the backlog in their applications, could be very useful, very productive members of the workforce, paying tax and national insurance.
Okay, so
And
you'd
also
use
retrain
migrants and
people,
asylum
retrain-
seekers for as
not
carers
just
while they were
them, there are
being
people
processed.
Not just them. I was only speaking about them because you asked specifically about them. But there are people in this country at the moment who would like to do that. But a lot of them are on waiting lists for hospital treatments that they can't get because people who could easily be looked after at home and would prefer to be looked after at home cannot get out of hospital because the care packages are not there because of the shortage of workers in the social care sector. So if we could get the whole thing moving, we could get the care that people need.
And it's 50 jobs, and we must leave it there. Thank you very much. Thank you. I will continue in cases which have taken place in our political history, as well as testing the current moment. You've travelled to the Basildon constituency in Essex, a seat that's been held by the Tories for decades.
Parties are effortlessly patronised when they try to categorise the target voters. We remember Bob Dylan eventually overtaken on the right by Mr. Woman, but none has had the staying power of Essex man and his lusty offspring, Basil Woman.
Labour has very important developments. The Conservatives have followed on in Mr. Vice President. The Conservative majority has gone up.
Conservatives dominated the Essex seat for 18 of them. For a generation, nearly 65% across the county in 2019, thanks to Labour's collapse. With Thatcher here, and Basil Woman, the devil. John Major's famous comeback election victory.
The day he got elected, and we actually all marched at that side here, and we marched into the council chamber with Dave Banks, and the amount of people that are staffed there that are actually pleased about that.
Kevin Blake, the longest-serving Conservative of Basildon Council, was in the thick of it.
That particular night in the count, we was all there, and we were basically shaking hands and, you know what, we gave our best, but we just haven't done it, and that's an absolute fact. And we resigned to all the people. David Adams always been upbeat, and he's going to be, but you know, it got to the stage where, yeah, and somehow it seemed like they found another couple of boxes. It really did that they're doing. We thought, you know what, hang about, we've got a chance here. And of course, when the result came out, it was party time.
David Amis was MP for 14 years before moving to Southend, where he was murdered by a knife attacker at a constituency surgery 3 years ago. Through the 80s, he championed Basil the Man. The wellspring was obvious.
She gave us the right to buy, which is a massive bonus, and I got my first opportunity to buy under her.
And you get the same answer from the other side. Angela Smith, now Lady Smith, a Labour leader in the Lords, held the seat for 13 years from 97.
I think in some ways Margaret Thatcher caught the mood and understood what people wanted in that sense. I think her coup in many ways was people being able to buy their council homes.
I spoke to her about families transported here from the East End of London when Basildon was in the first wave of new towns after the war.
We moved from the East End of London. My dad's factory, we were relocated in Basildon. It's not a million years ago. I was 10 at the time, and we had a house not just with a bathroom, but with 2 toilets, a garden, and a bedroom for myself and my sister.
And of course, any snooty Essex caricature gets her goat.
I think I'm a typical Essex woman. And that's what my best friends, my dearest friends, are those I was at school with in Essex. And I think we think, you know, people who are ambitious, who want to get on in life, very loyal to their community and their friends. They're good characteristics. All anybody wanted at one point was to have photographs of me. Can you hold this white stiletto, please?
It's more than 30 years now since the historian and journalist Simon Heffer, who's lived in the county all his life, defined Essex Man for Telegraph readers for the first time.
Essex changed a lot when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s. It ceased to be full of what we might call East Anglian people and became full of the London diaspora. And so many people in Essex suddenly started to speak with a Cockney accent. And as that generation grew up, they started off as what some people in the media rather crudely call Barrow boys. But they very quickly showed they had great commercial abilities. And they were an absolute model of Thatcherite aspiration.
So perhaps it's unsurprising that there is considerable private alarm in the Tory camp here about the thunder from the right. Reform UK is at home here, and quite apart from the one-off electric contest in Clacton on the coast, the danger to comfortable Tories is that enough votes go to Reform to let Labour come through. Add to that a nasty row in Basildon about a candidate parachuted in by party headquarters to replace the retiring MP without a selection contest. They talk about a blue wall in commuter land on the other side of London, the gin and jag belt, where Tories are vulnerable to Liberal Democrats. Here, it's from the right that there's danger for the Conservatives. Essex Man surely expect nothing less.
The stork breeding programme at Knepp in Sussex has been so successful. There are now about 80 storks there, with more than 40 chicks who are now getting ready to fly the nest for the first time. That's the strange tock-tock sound that you'll hear if you're near them. Laura Vaughan Hirsch is from the White Stork Project and has overseen the reintroduction scheme. Good afternoon, Laura.
Hi there, Sarah. Hello.
Why has it been so successful?
Well, it's taken a huge amount of work, but it's the surrounding habitat at Knepp. It's that abundance of insect life. It's that thriving ecosystem that's allowing the stork to do really well there.
Right, because, 40 this year when you've got a population, that's about 80, I think, is it?
That's right.
Right, so it's jumping. How many of them are likely to survive? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And sadly, with large migratory birds, the return rate is quite low. So I've read that you would expect a return of around 10% at maturity. So they go off on this fantastic migration. They go all the way to North Africa. And you would expect somewhere perhaps around 10% of them to return in 3 or 4 years when they reach maturity.
Right, but the others may be settling somewhere else. Doesn't necessarily.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've had really interesting stories. One of our storks has gone and made a home in the Netherlands and is breeding with a wild bird over there, which is really exciting. And a few of the others have landed in France and across the continent, and they might return or they might choose to stay.
Right. I think they were introduced, back in 2016, but those were birds that couldn't fly or couldn't migrate.
That's right. So they were started through a population of injured birds in the wild, rehabilitated at Warsaw Zoo in Poland, and then quarantined over at Cotswold Wildlife Park, and then brought over to Knepp and another site in East Sussex as kind of to start a magnet population to hopefully draw in other wild storks and keep our colony growing on our sites.
And that's been successful. Now, I think is this the first year they've migrated back?
That's right. So we started to see some migratory returns in spring this year, which is hugely exciting for the project. But as you said, it took them a while to breed. So they weren't breeding until 2020 on site. And so we're hoping that for these years, in the following years, we'll get more storks breeding and then we'll hopefully get more and more returns.
Okay. What difference do they make to the ecology and the landscape? Is it just sort of they're nice to look at and, what a lovely thought that they're there? Or do they make a difference to the whole the way the whole countryside works?
Well, both, I think. We often describe them as kind of a social keystone species rather than an ecological keystone species. Something like a beaver completely reshapes the landscape, but a stork is a white stork is this large, charismatic, beautiful bird that people can really engage with, and from learning about them and seeing them can think about wider landscape recovery. But I was actually recently corrected when I said they are not an ecological keystone species by some scientists at the Natural History Museum who said actually they might well be, and you're not thinking about the invertebrates. So we've recently just started some studies on these invertebrate associations.
Laura Vaughan Hirsch, thanks very much. I imagine that's certainly become more important with new numbers. Now, just before we go, Rishi Sunak has said he hopes veterans will find it in their hearts to forgive him for returning early from D-Day commemorations. He's going to be interviewed by Nick Robinson later. You can watch it on BBC One and Panorama at 8 tonight. That's it from us. That's the world at 1:45.
Studio direction was by Jonathan Greer. The editor was Mark Faulkner. Now on Radio 4, it's time for Understand the UK Election, our simple 10-part guide to everything going on this summer. The series kicks off by asking, what is the purpose of an election campaign?
Hello and welcome to Understand the UK Election, your essential guide to the general election. I'm Adam Fleming. My day job is presenting the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. But I've been covering general elections as a journalist since 2005, meaning this is my 6th general election. The date has been set, the 4th of July 2024, and in this first episode we're going to delve into what the actual purpose of an election campaign for the political parties is. Shortly we're going to talk to two big political strategists, but first of all joining us is my colleague, political correspondent Alex Forsyth. Hello!
Hello!
Okay, so first of all, what's the sort of typical day like in the campaign when you're on the front line?
I think the thing when you go in to cover an election campaign as a political journalist is that you have to go in prepared for pretty much anything. So you get a sense of where you might be on kind of day one, but it could be that you don't end up getting home until 4 days later and you've hit 4 nations of the UK in between. I mean, you're on this bus when they do have the battle buses, and you're kind of at the mercy of the party's plans, so you're travelling around with them where they go. So you see the kind of photo ops with the party leaders out and, you know, whatever stunt they're doing, or with their sleeves rolled up addressing a whole load of party activists. But there's also all that stuff behind the scenes, which is a lot of kind of party organisers and spinners trying to just keep it all going, to make sure nothing goes wrong, to make sure that, you know, if the party leader in most cases is going to come into contact with the public, that doesn't go wrong.
Also, we should say that certainly in previous election campaigns, if you were assigned to a campaign as the political correspondent following that party leader, you would be with that person constantly for about 5 or 6 weeks, with the same bunch of journalists as well. I imagine there was a real sort of like weird camaraderie.
You just have to hope you get on. I think that's kind of step one. You know, you're spending a lot of time together, and these campaigns are, you know, for politicians, journalists, there's hours and hours of travel. You know, there was one day that I remember in the late stages of the 2019 election campaign where I kind of woke up at 4 a.m. alarm call. We went to Grimsby Fish Market. We then had to get on the bus, and I have to say we all carried the smell of Grimsby Fish Market with us. We then got on a very small plane with same smell, you know, kind of permeating through all of our coats. But you do get a sense, I think, when you're doing a bus like that for a period of time, of the operation behind the scenes, and that tells you about the mood in the party, it tells you how they think the campaign's going. You can glean quite a lot just from that time spent in close quarters with the people who are on the kind of front line of these campaigns.
Alex, thank you so much. Right, our other guests have joined us now. It's Lee Kane, who was the key strategist for Boris Johnson at various points, including the EU referendum, 2019 election.
And his leadership campaign as well, which seems a long time ago too.
And we're also joined by John McTernan, who's a political strategist and was Tony Blair's political secretary.
It seems a long time ago, but Tony is still the figure against whom all Labour leaders compare themselves.
Right, so here's the kind of big philosophical question. We've heard what goes on in a campaign. We all know what we see on TV and see on websites and social media. What is the purpose, fundamentally, of all that activity, John?
The purpose, if you're in the lead, then you've been able to hold on to your voters, and the purpose, if you are behind, is to find a way to catch up, to find a weakness in the other guys. But we always say in campaigning, you don't win in the 4 weeks of the campaign, you win in the 4 years running up to it.
That's a really good point. You know, Dominic Cummings and I spent a lot of time in that summer before Boris even walked into Downing Street in July, looking at what is our strategy going to be, what is the mood of the public, how can we tell a story that shows that we understand what their concerns are and we've got the solutions to them. And that's why from day one, you know, we obviously knew that solving the Brexit challenge was going to be the main issue, but it was a gateway to unlocking the other things that people cared about, their priorities, you know, schools, crime, the NHS. So you would have a situation where, you know, the 6 o'clock news, you would have Dominic Grieve and whoever else sort of all shouting at each other like a rabble in a zoo on, you know, the top of the Six. But we take Boris out personally and throw him in a hospital or a school, and he would say, you know, obviously we need to get Brexit done, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to focus on, you know, new nurses, new hospitals. But that was. So by the time the short campaign began, we had really already won. The work had been done, it was just then making no mistakes.
So you have the strategy, and maybe that's encapsulated in a particular word or a 3-word slogan. Intellectually, how do you join up the activity, the frenetic activity that's going on the ground and with the candidates and with the party leaders, with that thought, that idea, that word or 3 words?
The challenge in a campaign is there's a huge amount of noise that comes through. And one of the real difficulties in politics is to actually keep talking to your actual audience, which is the voters. The biggest mistake politicians make is they talk to the media. So the media will be, you know, very exercised for all sorts of issues on a day-to-day basis because they want something new. So the conflict comes is that, you know, you're there wanting something new on the battle bus or wherever it might be, but we want to keep telling you that, you know, we're for change or wherever it might be. That's boring. So there's this constant friction point.
The thing that I always say about politics is we're obsessed with it. The average punter thinks about politics for 9 minutes a week.
And also presumably it's 9 chunks of 1 minute.
Which is why repetition is so important. And it's why, you know, why did Keir Starmer say in his opening election speech that his dad was a toolmaker? Because only 1 in 10 voters know his dad was a toolmaker. 1 in 10 voters know that Rishi's parents had an NHS background. They're not paying any attention.
I think the first big surprise I ever had about how election campaigns work was when I went out with somebody who was doing classic canvassing. So with the clipboard, really knocking on doors. And I went,
she said to me,
she was your big Labour MP.
She was our big Labour MP, wonderful, wonderful woman. And she said, we're going to win this. And I sort of said, you know, why do you think that? And she said, it feels to me like it did in '97 with Tony and Labour, where we have this momentum. When I'm speaking to people, I can sense this desire for change. But there's often data sets, she just sensed something from her time. Just and I thought that was really interesting to see.
That's what the truth's about, the data points. You do the big opinion polls, which are quantitative, they give you big numbers, you get 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 people, and you get a really deep analysis of things. Then you get the poll, which is the focus groups. And in focus groups, you get a feeling for where people are, the language they use to tell you the story, the language that will move them. Every focus group I want to gives you something that's important. That's where you get the great campaign slogans from. Because they're real people's language, and you can then play them back to them. Politics is head on heart. It's when you can't combine all those things together that they pull away at each other, and that's when you get incoherent strategies.
And then events happen. And I don't mean planned events, I mean things that aren't in the script. How are you processing them and trying to make them work to your advantage?
I think one of the core things when you're running an election campaign is knowing when an event is something you can just ignore and it's media noise, and when it's something you actually have to get involved in. You know, I remember 2019, we sort of sat, sort of had all like morning meetings, and it's about sort of 8 o'clock, and someone's going out for coffee, and then you sort of got an eye on the TV, and you know, there's some Good Morning Britain journalist chasing after Boris, and he's like,
And it ends up in a fridge.
Are they taking him into the fridge?
Yeah.
Why are they taking him into the fridge?
I'll be with you in a second.
Yeah, I have an earpiece here in my hands, ready to go. Right, he's been taken inside, into the freezer.
Gone into the fridge.
There's a sunken.
It's quite heroic work,
That's
mate.
so far, isn't it?
That was heroic work.
But when your campaign is a good campaign, when the message is right, when these things tend to be sort of amusing silence that people forget about. It's on Twitter, but the country doesn't really care.
You said when events happen, do you respond or not respond? The thing is, you test the challenge coming in and you say, does this blow us off our strategy? Yes. Do we need to respond to it? Yes. We make a response. Does it change our strategy? No.
Just picking up on John's point as well, I think one of those core decisions you have to make is can we just ride this out and keep going where we are? Is this a 24-hour cycle or or is this the sort of thing that's going to run for days and days and people aren't going to hear us going out and talking about change or sticking with the plan or whatever it might be? They're actually going to hear this particular issue. Often you find things like someone's not vetted a candidate properly, so they've said something somewhere or they've written an article that is actually going to get a lot of attention. And again, it's being able to decide quickly of, is this something we can defend? Does the Prime Minister want to go onto the TV tomorrow and talk about this? Or actually, if it's not, right, we act now, we remove them from the candidates list, so it's like, okay, there's been a mistake in vetting, we've taken the decision, we've moved forwards, and you've sort of lanced the boil. That's the only place for Keir now that it can go wrong. One of those issues bubbled up, and they handle it poorly, and the whole narrative can start to twist.
And just in terms of where we are with campaigning in 2024, what are things you think are going to kind of die out from the traditions, and what are things that are going to grow in future elections?
Well, the big campaign rally, that has sort of died and been reborn as an assembled one. In the 50s, Peckham Common, which is near where I live, the usual big election rallies, Gainesville came in, came rally, and real people went to assemble. Like now, you don't see real people at rallies. I think that's turned to a kind of unusual kind of genre. I think social media, the best social media is not coming to me or you or Lee, it's coming to the undecided floating voters. When you look at American politics, and you can say the winning candidates dominate the media of the moment. Roosevelt was great radio, JFK was great television, Donald Trump was great Twitter.
We are fighting the fake news. It's fake, phony, fake. Crooked Hillary, crooked Hillary. Ah, Sleepy Joe. Build that wall.
I think the social media point's a very interesting one. I think every election year is the new, it's the first social media election. I think that ship's.
Yeah, this is my fifth first social media election.
But if you actually look, we did a report this year on, talking to nation where people are getting their news from. Of those top 10 media sources, there was not a newspaper within it, which is a huge change from where we were 20, 30 years ago. It's dominated. It's still, broadcast is still king, and I think if there's one place in a campaign I want us to be, it's the top of the 6 and 10 on BBC. That is the gold standard you're looking for. But Facebook is very close behind, and it has that double power of, it's your friends and peers sharing it, which is very powerful. And under sort of 35s, what was really striking is we've seen an awful lot of the visual platforms, TikTok, Instagram, in a place where people get their news.
And we are going to have a whole episode of Understand the UK Election, which is dedicated to the role of the media. John, thank you very much. And Lee, thanks to you too.
Thank you.
And that's all for this episode of Understand the UK Election. Next time, we'll be looking at who are those candidates who knock on your door asking for your vote at this time of year. And you can find the rest of our series on BBC Sounds. Just search Understand the UK Election. We will have everything from what goes into a manifesto to how much we can predict how people will vote, all the way through to what actually happens on election day itself. Please do join me for all of it. And if you'd like to see a full list of candidates for any constituency in the UK, that is available now on the BBC News websites. Bye.
Understand the UK Election was presented by Adam Fleming. The series producer was Alex Davis. Sarah. After the news, Alan has a suggestion. It's the Archers.
Keep up with all the cricket action with the
Test Match Special Podcast. With you throughout the summer, from the T20 World Cup to the Test Series. Including exclusive interviews, in-depth analysis, and reaction to the biggest matches.
That backline can stand up with the best in the world of any country.
The Test Match Special Podcast. Listen on BBC Sounds.
BBC News at 2 o'clock. The Liberal Democrats have unveiled their election manifesto, which they say is a bold, ambitious and fully costed plan to save the NHS in England. The leader, Sir Ed Davies, says the challenge is enormous after years of Conservative chaos and neglect. Rishi Sunak has said he hopes people can forgive him for leaving D-Day commemorations early last week. The Prime Minister was at a British memorial in the morning, but was criticised for not attending an international service later in the day, a decision he's apologised for. Asked whether he'd considered resigning, he said, of course not. The Mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, has said she's stunned that a snap parliamentary election is to be held in France weeks before the Olympics and Paralympics. President Macron announced the vote after a surge in support for the far-right National Rally Party in European elections. Far-right parties also did well in Italy and Germany. Sarah Herbold is a professor in European politics at the London School of Economics and told The World at One here on Radio 4 the parties attract voters with promises of change.
And the radical right is very successful in using populist rhetoric to address people's grievances about concerns they may have about cost of living, the lack of affordable housing or high employment, and also linking that to sort of cultural concerns about immigration and how society is changing.
BBC News has been told that a post-mortem examination of the body of the TV and radio presenter Michael Mosley has found that he died of natural causes. His remains were found in a rocky area on the Greek island of Sina yesterday, 4 days after he went missing. The BBC has announced that Giovanni Pernice will not return as a professional dancer for the next series of Strictly Come Dancing. The 33-year-old performer has denied allegations of bullying and has vowed to clear his name. Cat owners in England are being reminded that they could be fined £500 if their pet isn't microchipped. New rules come into force today, but it's estimated 2 million cats have still not had the device implanted. BBC News.
This is BBC Radio 4. We've got award-winning Corner Shop comedy for you in 15 minutes. In today's episode of Fags, Mags and Bags, Bishop Briggs has a crisis of faith. You can find out what happens after The Archers, where Alan has questions for Harrison.